So as I mentioned, I'm going to go through the administrative interface. I'm first going to show you what it's like to create a campaign. So within this interface, you would go under Configure and then select Campaigns. And this will display any campaigns that might be configured, if there are any. But in this case, we're going to show creating a new one. And right off the bat, there's going to be a list of fields here. And I'll go through describing each one. So one obviously is just a descriptive name, whatever friendly name you wish to give that campaign. The next field is the start date. When will the campaign start? The next one is the expiry date, is when will the campaign end? By default, I think it's set to a month. However, you can change that to whatever suits your needs. Once that date is reached, the campaign is considered complete. The next part would be the campaign type. So there are two possible types for campaign. You have preview and progressive. So preview, there's only really two differences between the two campaign types. In preview mode, when the agent gets presented an item, they have the ability to accept it, reject it, or requeue it. So they're kind of full control on that one. In progressive mode, they get the same pop-up. However, the buttons to accept, reject, or requeue, they're grayed out, and a countdown timer starts, which is configurable. And when that countdown timer reaches 0, the agent's extension is forcibly dialing that phone number. So the agent doesn't really have control of that. The preview dialer will force their extension to dial that number. One thing to keep in mind, depending geographically what your dialing rules are in your country, progressive might not be the option for you, especially based on certain agent training. If an agent, for example, left themselves idle and walked away from their desk for whatever reason, there is a potential that they could get a pop-up from the preview dialer and cold call that customer. And then there's nobody at the other end. So that could violate some dialing rules within your geographical area if you don't train your agents correctly to stay at their desk and not leave their desk while they're idle. The next one would be the Make Busy code. As I mentioned in the beginning about how the dialer functions is once an agent reaches a specific threshold in that queue, an agent group, they are put on Make Busy and then presented an item. So they're put on Make Busy because the preview dialer does have to reserve them for themselves. And this would be whatever Make Busy code you would like to select. In most cases, customers create their own Make Busy code, call it preview dialer or outbound dialer, and they use that. And for visual purposes, when a supervisor is looking in the real-time views and they see them on that Make Busy code, it is most likely the case that they're currently previewing a preview dialer item. Once they've completed the call and they've dispositioned it, the system will put them back into idle for them. There's only a couple cases where the preview dialer will leave them in Make Busy. One example would be they were presented an item and they didn't accept, reject, or requeue it. Let's just say, again, they walked away from their desk, but they're in preview mode instead of progressive. There is also a timeout for that campaign item. So it'll sit there, and once it times out, it automatically requeues that campaign item. However, it will leave them in Make Busy because we don't know why they didn't select it. If they walked away from their desk, we don't want to throw them back into idle, back into an inbound queue potentially. And I think the next reason why we would leave them on Make Busy is if they forcibly requeue the item. When they're presented with the item, they can actually hit a requeue button. Typically that's used because maybe they can't deal with the item at the time because they're currently dealing with something else. But if they forcibly requeue that item, it still keeps them on Make Busy as well. The next field here would be the schedule. So you're capable of creating some very basic schedules, named schedules in the preview dialer, and you just have to select them out of the drop-down here. I'll show you after this on how you create those schedules. The next item would be the scheduled requeue time. So this is the amount of time after an agent selects a disposition code that does a requeue, how long it goes back into the campaign for before it's served up to another agent. This is just the default amount of time. So a little bit later, I'm going to show you how you create your disposition codes for your campaigns. And the disposition code can do one of two things. It could either mark the item as complete, or it can mark it as a requeue. An example of a requeue would be a disposition code called no answer. And that would mark the item as a requeue. And if you selected that disposition code at the end of a call, this here would be the default amount of time that it would go back into the campaign before served up to another agent. There are other options with the disposition code to override that default, and I'll go through those shortly in a moment. The next two fields are the queue and the agent group that you're assigning the campaign to. As I mentioned, you do have to assign it to a queue and an agent group, especially for blended purposes for inbound, outbound, but it can be used for pure outbound. The next two fields here will be the thresholds for an agent. So how many agents have to be idle within that queue? And how long do they have to be idle for before presenting an item to them? So in a blended environment where you're assigning the campaign to a queue that also does inbound calls, you would play with these thresholds in order to make sure you do have agents always available for inbound calls if that's your priority. So in this case, the way I have it is as soon as one agent is idle and they've been idle for 1 minute, we will put them on Make Busy and present them with an item. However, if you increase this to 5, it would be as soon as the 5th longest idle agent has been idle for 1 minute, then we will present an item to them. The other 4 agents aren't going to get a campaign item until a 5th one becomes available and one of them has been idle for 1 minute. So it's a way of reserving a certain number of agents within your inbound workflows. The other way to get around doing that as well is, say you have 10 agents in your queue, have only 5 agents log into the Preview Dialer interface. The agent interface, there is a separate agent interface for the Preview Dialer in order to interact with it. So you will only get campaign items if you're logged into that interface. If you're not logged in, you're just a regular agent sitting in that queue. The next item is the timeout, and this serves one of two purposes depending on the campaign mode that you're in. In preview mode, this is just the duration of time that the campaign item will sit up in front of you, allowing you to read it before it will time out if you don't accept it. In progressive mode, it acts as the timer that it will count down, and once it reaches 0, it will forcibly dial that phone number for that campaign item. The next field would be the CPN substitution. So this allows you to specify what your outbound caller ID looks like when you're dialing somebody. So you can, on a per campaign basis, you can set a different phone number to make it look like, a different phone number that you're looking like from the person that you're calling. So if you have 2 inbound 800 numbers or 2 different inbound 800 numbers for your call center, one campaign can dial out as that 800 number, and the other campaign can dial out as the other. The next one is the max requeue count. So you would look at this field probably kind of like a retry. When an agent dials a customer and they're completed and they select a disposition code, as I mentioned, the disposition code could mark it as a requeue. So you would have to look at that kind of like an attempt. And if 4 different agents have tried dialing that phone number and all 4 of them have done a disposition code that does a requeue, you might at one point want to say, okay, after 4, we're going to stop trying to call this customer. So this allows you basically to set the max number of attempts or the max number of requeues for a campaign item. If you leave it at 0, it is infinite. It'll keep requeuing the item over and over and over again, and you can keep retrying and retrying and retrying. However, as soon as you increase that number above 0, then it looks at that physical number and will stop at that number. And once the max number of requeues have been hit, it marks the item as complete, with a status of max requeued, so that you can see in the report, you might see some items that say max requeued, so that just means you tried them enough times. So that's the basics of just the initial information of creating the campaign. Once you've created the campaign, it'll show up in your list here. And this is also where you would import your items for the campaign. So we do have an import template that the customers can follow. I'm just going to go to the import items page just to show you what this looks like. So it allows you to import via CSV or Excel file. And it's heavily based on what the name of the header is. So the very first row in your CSV or Excel file has to have a header name. And as long as the header name matches exactly anything that's listed below here, it will import it into the campaign. There are 3 mandatory fields that you have to have. So you have to have at least a contact name and a phone number and phone number description. So the phone number description would be like cell, mobile, business, or whatnot. And obviously the contact name would be the name of the person that you're calling. However, if you wanted additional data, such as an account name, account number, we have several just placeholder fields. So just placeholder data. It could be any extra data that you want. We have some script fields that allows you to apply a large amount of text if you wanted to put down like a script on how somebody's supposed to greet that individual. Or additional phone numbers. You can have that in there, provided that the header of that column matches exactly what you see here. And there's not too much to it. It's just a matter of choosing the file. I'm going to have to go here. And a matter of uploading. Uploads it, and it's into the campaign. So before I get on here, I'm going to go through a couple of the items that we saw during the creation of the campaign, which has to do with dispositions and the schedule. So I'll show you under Configure, there is a Schedule section, and this allows you to create some basic schedules for the campaign. I'm just going to hit Edit on one of these. And it is, like I said, it is a very basic schedule. It's not very in-depth, but it allows you to enable or disable campaign for specific days of the week. Okay? And it also allows you to set one time frame as to when items will be presented to customers or presented to agents. When it comes to a pure outbound perspective, typically you wouldn't be using the campaigns because you just want people making outbound calls constantly. But from a blended environment, you might want to put a schedule. Say, for instance, your inbound queues between 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. are pretty slow. The mornings are when it's really busy, but the afternoon things are not as busy. So this would allow you to say campaign items can only go out between 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. on a Monday, and you can do the same thing for the different days of the week. Once you've saved that, as I showed you before in the campaign creation, you can just select that schedule from the drop-down. So the schedule is shareable across multiple campaigns. The next item is the dispositions. So as I mentioned, after an agent's completed a call, they're presented with a list of disposition codes to describe how the call ended. It's completely configurable. The customer can put whatever they wish to put in there. And when creating one of these, it's just a name, description. The checkmark box for completed means, am I marking the items complete or not? If it's not checked, it treats it as a requeue. If it's checked, it marks it as complete and it doesn't attempt to call that individual anymore. And then also you have the enabled checkmark box. It allows you to enable or disable disposition codes from the system if you need to. So everything's based on a global disposition code list. So by default, every campaign shares this list. However, you can get more granular on the campaign level as to what disposition codes actually show up. By default, everything shows up from within this list. But if you go to Configure Campaigns, you see there's a Disposition Codes button here. When you select that disposition codes button, this allows you to assign the disposition codes. So you'll see here I've assigned a few of them. If I were to do this, I'm just going to delete them all. So if my configuration was just such that I didn't assign anything, it will show everything from the global list. However, if I only selected these two, then only those two disposition codes will show up for that campaign. Okay. The other thing it allows you to do is for any disposition code that does a requeue, you can actually set the default requeue time for each individual disposition code on that campaign. So as I showed you before in the campaign creation, there was a global default for a disposition code that does a requeue. However, in here, you can specify something more granular. If you leave this at 0, it uses the default from the campaign. If you specify a value here, it overrides it with that value. And the agents also actually have an extra ability to even override this, and I'll go through that once I show you the agent interface. So from a configuration perspective for campaigns, schedules, and dispositions, that's pretty much all the options for it. There is the blue Manage button that you'll see here at the top, and this just takes you to a list of your campaigns, and it allows you to pause or play the campaign or forcibly stop the campaign. So by default, a campaign will show up here, and you'll see a green play button, which will look similar to this, as you see here. When you want to start the campaign, you just hit the play button, and at any time you can pause it for whatever period of time and play it again. However, if you are done with that campaign and you know you're done with it, you don't need to deal with it anymore, you would hit the force stop button. And that's going to pop up a message asking you if you're sure you want to do that because it marks the campaign as complete and removes it from the system. And the only way you can see it is through the reporting interface to report on it later on. So I'm just going to go under the Report tab. So there is a single report for the campaign, which is kind of like a trace report with a little bit of summarized information. It's a snapshot of where the campaign is right now. So I'm just going to run the activity report here. And I'm just going to, it popped up on my other screen here, so I'm just going to move it over. So this is the report that gets outputted. It's a very basic report, especially from a format perspective. We've had many customers in the past with the previous legacy preview dial that we had that didn't want the formatting in the report. They wanted to be able to have the ability to easily copy and paste out of this into other sources or resources. And leaving no formatting in it was the easiest way to go for that. So the very first line on the report here will show you, how many items were distributed, which is how many were uploaded into the campaign, how many have been completed, how many have been requeued so far, how many items are remaining within the campaign, how many were rejected, and so forth. So it's just a brief summary of your items and where they're at right now. Underneath, this will display any campaign item that has been presented to somebody. So any campaign item that's still in the campaign that has yet to be presented to anybody yet at all, it won't show up in the list. This only shows you campaign items that have been touched by an agent in some fashion. And it is the last state that that campaign item was in. So as an example, this line here shows that this employee had this account name and contact. It would show you the number dialed if it was a dialed phone number. Actually, I can show you this one down here. The number that it dialed, the duration of the call, if there was one. This one shows that it was a failed call, a bad phone number, or the extension wasn't plugged in on the other end, and what the status is of that. So the disposition code, if it marked it as complete, obviously it's going to show a status of complete. If it shows a disposition code that actually does a requeue, it'll actually show you the disposition code and the status as scheduled requeue. And as I mentioned, this is the last state. So as an example, this one here is a requeue. So if I ran the report today, it shows it as a requeue. If I run this report tomorrow, that same campaign item might not show as requeued anymore. It might show as made sale completed. So you can look at it kind of like a real-time view to a certain extent. However, it's just a real-time snapshot of when you ran that report and where those campaign items were at that point. So what I'll do now is I'll go through what the agent interface looks like. Just let me know if you actually see that login screen.
Yep, I see it.
Oh, okay, perfect. So the preview dialer does have its own interface to log into, its own web-based interface. However, what it does do is it encapsulates WebIgnite inside of it. So an agent can do everything they normally would do within WebIgnite, however, still interact with their preview dialer items. So I'm just going to log in as an agent here. And you're going to notice inside of this, it's going to load WebIgnite inside this big square here. So it's loaded WebIgnite inside of it. Agents can deal with emails and chats and stuff like that as they normally would within the WebIgnite. However, once they've reached this threshold, as you see now, WebIgnite will shrink a little bit and it'll present to the right-hand side the campaign item. So as you see from the import, you have the timeout and it's counting down right now. So it will time out once it reaches 0. But this will display any data that you've actually imported within that import. The scripts tab will show you the scripts that you may have imported with that import file. And the disposition codes tab is where you outline how the call ended. Now I can't do anything right now, like everything, the checkmark box is grayed out because I haven't made a call yet. The disposition codes tab will automatically take focus once you've completed your call. So if I try to dial this phone number, oh, I'm not logged in on the other side. Let me do that real quick. Now this shows you if it was a failed call. You hit OK, it takes you to the disposition codes tab, and you would select the disposition code on how this call ended. So in this case, I'm just going to leave it on call failed. I'm just going to hit the check mark box. And you'll notice that it puts me back into idle. And once I've reached a specific idle threshold, I'll get the item campaign again. And I'm just going to log into my other server and log the agent in so that I can oh, sorry about that. I just just give me a minute here. I used the same extension by accident. Login. And then all right, so go back to idle here. Get my campaign item. I'm going to dial this individual. And now I'm going to answer on the other side. So as you see here on the Ignite side of things, you see your actual conversation, who you've dialed and everything you would normally do in WebIgnite. Once I hang up the call here, I automatically go to the disposition codes tab now that the call has ended. So now I can select a requeue disposition code. As you'll notice here in the list, you'll see a C or an R in front of the disposition code. It's just a visual indicator for the agents to know that they're selecting a disposition code that does a complete or does a requeue. If they're doing a requeue, it's going to go back into the campaign for whatever configured time you did either on the disposition code or on the campaign, as I showed you before how you can configure that more granularly. But an agent right now, if you look below, has the ability to override that themselves. So they can leave it as the default for the campaign, or they can actually specify a certain number of hours and minutes that they want to requeue this for, or they can even override to a specific date and time, provided the date and time does not exceed the end date or expiry date of the campaign. So in this case, I'm just going to leave it on the default timeout. I'm going to disposition the activity. Again, I go back to idle, and then I will reach another campaign item once I've reached a specific threshold. So from an agent interface perspective, it's pretty simple. They don't have to. I don't feel they need to be retrained. On the item itself. If they've done the WebIgnite training, they do everything they normally would in WebIgnite. The right-hand side notification is very simple. It's accept, reject, requeue, and then disposition the activity. One thing to note too is you have the ability to retry different phone numbers. So as an example, I'm just going to dial again. I will answer. I will hang up. And when you get to the disposition codes tab, you could disposition it. However, if you hit the blue button for retry, it takes you back to the beginning, and you can check in the drop-down if there are more campaign or more phone numbers to dial, and then you can try dialing another phone number. So you can do that numerous times. So dialing those different phone numbers doesn't affect that whole max requeue count. The max requeue count is on the campaign item in itself, not how many times you do the retry button. That's just within the session. And that's pretty much it so far. I don't know if you have any questions or concerns that you would like to raise, or?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. This has been great. Maybe one question is, so when I do make that outbound call, do my scripts show up automatically, or do I as an agent have to click on this script tab?
You have to click on the script tabs to get to them.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And then dispositions.
They're pretty freeform.
So if the call does fail, does it automatically go to dispositions, or does the agent have to click on dispositions?
No, it'll go automatically to dispositions.
Okay.
Yeah, anytime the call is ended, whether it's failed or completed or anything like that, as soon as the conversation ends, it takes you immediately to the disposition codes tab.
Right, okay.
And as you see what happened right there, it automatically requeued because we let it time out. And it's keeping me on Make Busy because it doesn't know why it timed out. We don't want to throw them back into an inbound queue if they're not there.
So in the upper right-hand corner, there's a status with a drop-down. What does that do up in that right-hand? Yeah, that.
So it's just a simple login, log out. The whole point of showing the green is to know that you are connected to the preview dialer or there's no issues. If that is yellow or red, you've lost connectivity to the preview dialer. Actually, I'll show you what's going to happen here if I restart the service. If it knows definitively that the connection's completely gone, it'll log you out completely. So if I go to my contact center, and if I stop the preview dialer service, you'll see right off the bat, dialer server is disconnected. There's an error in the WebSocket. You hit OK, it logs you out.
All right, and then your status goes to red. Gotcha. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, status goes to red. So now that I've started it again, I'll give it a second to start up. But you'll see as it's logging in, it'll go from red to yellow, I think, to green.
So as an agent, do I have two instances of WebIgnite running,
no,
or just this one?
Just this one, yeah. So if you're if you're an agent that does outbound, that needs to do preview dialer items, you would only log into this interface. If you're an agent that just does inbound calls, then you would log in just the WebIgnite interface because there's no point in being in the preview dialer interface if you're not going to get outbound items.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah, that's all the questions I had.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Unless there's anything else you wanted to...
I just don't know if I provided you the sample import template yet. If not, I'll do it right now.
No, let's go and do that. I was a little bit surprised. Like usually when you see these templates, it's the columns, not the rows, where you have the various the name, the contact numbers, and all that kind of stuff. It's usually...
Well, I can show you what the import template itself looks like. Yeah, so we listed it that way just to say what headers we support. But if I go here, let's see here. MICC, PS, preview dollar, root, source, import template. Oops. So as you see here, the first row has got to contain the headers that I mentioned in that list. That's a list of headers we support, and they can exist anywhere. It doesn't matter where they exist in the row. Account number doesn't have to be column A. It could be column F, provided the header is named exactly account number. So as long as they're named exactly as you see them here or on that page that I had showed you, whatever data is in that column, it'll import it.
And where is this information stored once you import it?
It's stored into the preview dialer database.
Okay, and the preview dialer database resides where?
Same server as the My Contact Center server.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Because when you have customer information, that could be sensitive, and so people will want to know, how do I protect anyone from getting access to this information for privacy and security reasons?
Yeah. So when it comes to that perspective, especially if you're talking about like PCI compliance, or if you're going to talk HIPAA or anything along those lines, you typically don't. It'd be up to the customer, obviously, to take care of what data they're putting in there and following that compliancy. When it comes to PCI compliancy, don't import like a credit card number in here. You know what I mean? Like, we shouldn't know about credit card numbers. That'd be up to you to look into your own system at that point, right? It's meant to display just enough information for whoever's going to be calling this customer. They know enough about them, and they could potentially take that and also look up in another resource, for more information on it. You wouldn't want to put information in here that's extremely sensitive. That should be residing in another system that the agent should be loading up to get the rest of that information.
All right, sounds good. I'm going to stop the recording.
From a compliance perspective, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. It's really up to the customer to protect that data. But I just wanted to ask if where it actually exists in order for them to do, if they wanted to do an audit and they wanted to look at it, or if they wanted to protect it. So it's really up to them to protect that server information. That information.
Correct. Yeah. Like, I think, like, in some cases, from a MICC perspective, sometimes they encrypt the drive, right, of the whole system. There's different ways of how they can go around protecting that information. But for sure, like, the information in here is to contain the phone numbers you want to dial, who you're contacting, and possibly a few pieces of extra information so you know what this is about, the call is about, or something along those lines. It's just for slight descriptive purposes. If you want to know much more about that individual, typically they would also be loading that. And that's hence another reason why it's preview dialer, is it gives the agent time to do other stuff, to look things up before they decide to call the individual. It's definitely not
Okay.
meant to house large amounts of sensitive data or anything along those lines. It's just a record of somebody we would like to call.
Gotcha. All right, I'm just going to hit the stop recording button, and then we